My son told me to stop spending his money. Those were his exact words when he walked into my kitchen with a fake doctor and legal papers that would strip away everything I'd worked for in 72 years. I'm Riven Holloway, retired judge, and my own son just tried to steal my life. See, Brandon thought grief had made me weak, though losing his mother meant losing my mind. He was betting that a widowed old man wouldn't fight back when his lawyer's son decided to protect him from his own finances. He was wrong. This story has more legal twists than a Supreme Court case, and before it's over, you'll see what happens when someone mistakes kindness for weakness. If you're joining us from anywhere that family loyalty gets complicated, and let's be honest, that's everywhere, you'll want to stick around for this one. Here's the thing about power. Sometimes the person who appears defeated is actually setting the perfect trap. My son thought he'd won. The moment I signed those papers, he had no idea what was coming. The intervention happened on a Tuesday, March 15th, 2:30 in the afternoon to be exact. I remember because judges remember details. It's what we do. Brandon walked into my kitchen with a man in a cheap suit carrying a manila folder. "Dad, this is Dr. Williams," Brandon said, not meeting my eyes. "He's here to help." Dr. Williams smiled the kind of smile you see in courtrooms. All teeth, no warmth. He opened his folder and pulled out forms, official-looking forms with medical letterhead. "Mr. Holloway, your son is concerned about some memory issues you've been having?" Memory issues? I looked at Brandon. My son, the real estate lawyer who used to sit in my chambers during summer breaks, learning about justice and procedure. The boy who once said he wanted to be just like his father. "What memory issues?" I asked. Brandon stepped forward. "Dad, you forgot Mom's birthday last month. You've been asking the same questions repeatedly, and yesterday you couldn't remember where you put the checkbook." Every word is a lie. Eleanor's birthday was February 14th. I'd visited her grave that morning with fresh roses, the same pink ones she loved for 43 years. The checkbook was exactly where it always was, in the second drawer of her desk, where I'd put it after paying the gardener. But I said nothing. Sometimes the best defense is letting your opponent think they're winning. Dr. Williams conducted his examination, basic questions about the date, the president, simple arithmetic. I answered correctly but slowly, with just enough hesitation to seem uncertain. In my peripheral vision, I watched Brandon relax. "Mr. Holloway," Dr. Williams concluded, "I'm recommending that your son take over financial management of your assets. It's for your own protection." The magic word, protection. The same word every con artist uses when they're about to rob you blind. Brandon had prepared paperwork, power of attorney documents already typed up, waiting for my signature. The estate Eleanor and I had built over 40 years of marriage, $1.9 million in assets, including the house, her life insurance, and my pension, would all be under his control. I signed the papers with a shaking hand. Let him think age had made me weak. But here's what my son didn't know. I remembered everything, including the conversation I'd overheard 3 weeks earlier when he thought I was napping. Eleanor had been gone for 4 months when the intervention happened. 4 months since I'd held her hand in that hospital bed, watching lung cancer take the strongest woman I'd ever known. She'd made me promise 2 things before she died: take care of myself and watch out for Brandon. "He's struggling more than he lets on," she'd whispered that last night. "Money troubles. I'm worried what he might do." I thought she meant his divorce proceedings. Brandon's wife had filed papers 6 months earlier, seeking half of everything, including his share of our family assets. What I didn't realize was how deep the rabbit hole went. The day after the power of attorney was signed, Brandon drove me to Bank of America. Our family banker, Patricia Morris, had worked with us for 15 years. She knew Eleanor, knew our financial habits, knew we'd never made a withdrawal over $5,000 without discussing it first. "I need to update the account access," Brandon told her, sliding the power of attorney across her desk. "Dad's having some cognitive issues." Patricia looked at me with concern. I gave her what I hoped appeared to be a confused smile. "Of course," she said. "We'll need to change the PIN and add your signature cards." Within an hour, Brandon had complete control. That afternoon, he transferred $15,000 to his personal checking account. The first of many transfers. I went home and sat in Eleanor's study, surrounded by her law books. She'd been a paralegal before we married, had kept up with legal changes, even in retirement. Her desk still held the neat stacks of documents she'd organized, insurance papers, investment statements, copies of our wills. And tucked in the bottom drawer, a folder labeled "For Riven, Emergency Only." Inside, I found something that made my blood run cold. Bank statements, recent ones, Brandon's accounts, somehow obtained through Eleanor's connections at the title company where she'd worked part-time. The numbers told a story I wasn't prepared for. Gambling losses, massive ones, Atlantic City, Borgata Casino, with debts totaling $280,000. Recent correspondence from Consolidated Credit, the kind of debt collection agency that doesn't send gentle reminders. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the deposits. Regular transfers from his real estate practice escrow accounts. Client money. Money that should have been sitting in protected accounts for home buyers, instead being funneled to cover gambling debts. My son wasn't just stealing from me. He was stealing from people who trusted him to handle the biggest purchases of their lives. I closed the folder and walked to the kitchen. On the counter sat Eleanor's phone, still connected to our family plan. I'd kept meaning to cancel it, but couldn't bring myself to delete that last connection to her. Now I was grateful for my procrastination. I powered it on and found her contacts list. Eleanor had been methodical about everything, including keeping track of people who might help in emergencies. Lunara Chen, private investigator, licensed in Pennsylvania, specialized in financial crimes. Eleanor had met her at a women's business networking event 2 years earlier. I called the number. "Chen Investigations, this is Lunara." "Ms. Chen, my name is Riven Holloway. My wife, Eleanor, gave me your number. I believe my son is stealing from me, and I need proof." Silence on the other end. Then, "Judge Holloway? Eleanor mentioned you. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should help you if you called." Eleanor had known. Somehow she'd seen this coming. "Can you meet me tomorrow? I have bank statements and some concerning information about my son's activities." 2:30 work for you? And Judge Holloway? Bring everything. If your son is what I think he is, we're going to need all the ammunition we can get. I hung up and walked to the window. Across the street, my neighbor's dog was chasing squirrels. The same dance that played out every evening, predator and prey in an endless cycle. But sometimes the prey is smarter than the predator realizes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Brandon as a child, sitting in my study while I prepared for cases, asking endless questions about right and wrong, justice and consequences. When had ambition turned into greed? When had love turned into entitlement? At 3 a.m, my phone rang. Brandon's voice, slightly slurred. "Dad, I hope you understand why I had to do this. The power of attorney thing. Mom would have wanted me to protect you." "Of course, son. You're just looking out for me." "Exactly. And Dad, don't worry about money anymore. I've got everything under control." I hung up and stared at the ceiling until dawn. Brandon thought he was protecting himself, but he just handed me the opening I needed. Because that phone call? Eleanor's phone had a recording feature, and I'd accidentally activated it. The next morning, I did what any good investigator does. I started with the basics. Dr. Williams, the man who diagnosed my supposed dementia, had left his business card. Professional looking, embossed lettering, an address in downtown Philadelphia. I called the number. Disconnected. I looked up the address online. A Starbucks. I called the Pennsylvania Medical Licensing Board. "I'd like to verify the credentials of Dr. Jonathan Williams, license number." I read the number from his card. "Sir, we have no record of a Dr. Jonathan Williams with that license number. Are you sure you have the correct information?" I hung up and smiled for the first time in months. My son had hired a fake doctor to give me a fake diagnosis. In legal terms, that's called fraud. In family terms, that's called betrayal. When Lunara Chen arrived at 2:30, she brought a leather portfolio and the kind of no-nonsense attitude I remembered from my prosecutor friends. 50-ish, Asian American, with eyes that missed nothing. "Judge Holloway, Eleanor told me a lot about your family. She was worried about Brandon's behavior patterns, especially after his separation. I showed her everything. The fake medical report, the banking documents, the power of attorney signed under false pretenses. This is good," she said, photographing each document, "but it's not enough. We need to establish pattern and intent. You mentioned gambling?" I handed her Eleanor's folder. Lunara's expression darkened as she read. 280,000 in casino debt. Jesus. And these escrow transfers. Judge, your son isn't just stealing from you, he's committing a felony. Client funds are sacred in real estate law. What do? We build a case, methodically, like you used to do in family court, except this time the defendant is your son. She pulled out a contract. My retainer is $2,500. Can you access that much without triggering suspicion? I thought about my hidden emergency account, the one Eleanor had insisted we keep just in case. $5,000 in cash, stored in our bedroom safe. Yes, good. First, we're going to surveil Brandon's activities. I want to know where he goes, who he talks to, every transaction he makes. Second, we're going to trace those escrow violations. I have contacts at the Pennsylvania Real Estate Commission. She stood to leave, then turned back. Judge, I have to ask, are you prepared for what we might find? Sometimes digging deeper reveals things that can't be unknown. I thought about Eleanor's warning, about the son I'd raised to believe in justice, now using the legal system to rob his own father. Ms. Chen, I spent 35 years on the bench watching people lie to themselves about their children. I told myself Brandon was different, but my wife knew better. After she left, I sat in my study and called the phone number Dr. Williams had written on his fake prescription pad. A young man answered. "Jimmy's Pizza, how can I help you?" "I think I have the wrong number. I was trying to reach Dr. Williams." "No doctor here, man, just pizza." And I hung up and called the address listed on his fake medical license, a laundromat. The woman who answered spoke primarily Spanish, but understood enough English to tell me no doctor worked there. Brandon had paid someone $8,500 to impersonate a physician. The canceled check was in his account records, made out to J. Williams Medical Consulting, a company that didn't exist, for a doctor who didn't exist, providing a diagnosis that was pure fiction. That evening, Brandon called to check on me. "How are you feeling, Dad? Any confusion today?" "I'm fine, son. A little tired. Dr. Williams said that was normal." Good. Listen, I moved some money around today. Investment opportunities. You don't need to worry about the details." "Of course, you know best." After I hung up, I walked to Eleanor's picture on the mantel. 43 years of marriage, and she'd known our son better than I did. "You tried to warn me," I said to her photograph. "But don't worry, I'm learning fast." The next morning I would call Lunara with instructions to expand the investigation. Because if Brandon thought a fake doctor and forged documents were enough to steal my life's work, he was about to discover what happened when you lied to a retired judge. But that phone call would have to wait. 3 days later, Lunara called with her first report. "Judge, we have a problem. And by problem, I mean your son is in deeper than we thought." I met her at a diner in Cheltenham, far enough from my neighborhood to avoid accidental encounters with Brandon. She arrived with a thick folder and the grim expression of someone who'd discovered exactly what they'd hoped not to find. "Let's start with the gambling," she said, sliding photographs across the table. "These were taken over the past 3 days. Your son visits Atlantic City twice a week, minimum. Always the Borgata Casino, always high-stakes poker. Whoop-whoop. The photos showed Brandon at casino tables, looking haggard and desperate. In one image, he was arguing with a man in an expensive suit, the kind of man who collected debts with interest rates that weren't advertised. "That's Anthony Corso," Lunara continued. "Works for Consolidated Credit. They're the outfit holding Brandon's gambling debt. $280,000, as your wife's documents indicated, but the interest is compounding weekly." She showed me more photos. Brandon leaving the casino with Corso and two other men, all of them walking towards the parking garage with the body language of people having an unpleasant conversation. How long does he have? Based on the chatter my contacts are hearing, maybe 6 weeks before they stop asking politely. 6 weeks. No wonder Brandon had been so aggressive about getting control of my finances. He wasn't just protecting himself from divorce proceedings, he was running from loan sharks. Now for the worst news, Lunara said, the escrow violations. She opened another folder, bank statements, wire transfer records, correspondence from the Pennsylvania Real Estate Commission. Your son has been systematically draining client escrow accounts for 8 months. Not large amounts each time. $5,000 here, $10,000 there, but it adds up. Total embezzlement so far is approximately $45,000. My stomach dropped. His own clients? Families buying homes. Young couples putting their life savings into down payments, trusting Brandon to hold their money safely until closing. Instead, he's been using it to feed his gambling addiction. She showed me specific cases. The Patterson family, first-time homebuyers, saving for 3 years to purchase a small house in Norristown. Their $15,000 earnest money gone. The Morrison couple, relocating for work. Their $20,000 deposit mysteriously delayed in processing. What happens when these deals close and the money's missing? Brandon's been juggling, using new client deposits to cover old withdrawals, hoping to hit a big win at the casino to make everything whole. It's the classic embezzlement spiral. I thought about these families, trusting their futures to my son's professional integrity, never imagining their lawyer was stealing from them to cover gambling debts. There's more, Lunara continued. I found the source of Dr. Williams. Real name is Jimmy Castellanos, unemployed actor from South Philadelphia. Brandon paid him $8,500 to play doctor for one afternoon. She showed me Castellanos' headshot and resume. Community theater experience, a few commercial auditions, currently working at his uncle's pizza shop, the same pizza shop I'd accidentally called. Castellanos kept Brandon's text messages, probably as insurance. Want to hear them? She played an audio recording. Brandon's voice clearly panicked. You just need to seem official, okay? Medical terminology, serious demeanor. Tell him he has early-stage dementia and shouldn't be making financial decisions. I'll have all the paperwork ready. What if he asks medical questions? He's 72 and just lost his wife. He's not thinking clearly. Trust me, he'll believe whatever you tell him. The casual cruelty in my son's voice made my hands shake. This wasn't desperation. It was calculated manipulation of my grief. Judge, there's one more thing. Your son doesn't know you hired me, but he does know something is wrong. Yesterday, he called 3 different private investigation firms asking about background checks and surveillance detection. He suspects? He's paranoid, which means he's guilty. Guilty people always think they're being watched. She closed her folders. We need to accelerate our timeline. I recommend bringing in additional help. What kind of help? Legal help. Your son is about to realize he can't juggle his embezzlement much longer. When that happens, he'll get desperate. And desperate people make reckless moves. She handed me a business card. Alina Brooks, a state attorney, specialized in elder abuse and family financial crimes. Eleanor knew her too. They worked on a pro bono case together last year. Eleanor again. Even from beyond the grave, my wife was still trying to protect our family. That evening, I called Alina Brooks. Her voice was warm but professional, with the confidence of someone who'd handled complex family legal battles. Judge Holloway, Lunara filled me in on your situation. I have to be direct. Your son is exposing himself to serious criminal liability. The fake doctor alone is fraud. The escrow embezzlement is a felony. What are our options? We can report him to the authorities now, or we can wait and build a stronger case. The risk of waiting is that he might transfer more assets or flee. The advantage is that we can document pattern and intent. I thought about Brandon as a child, promising to always tell the truth, to never lie to his parents. Ms. Brooks, I want the strongest possible case. My son chose to betray his family and his clients. He deserves to face the full consequences. Then we wait, we watch, and we build an airtight case. After I hung up, I realized something had changed in me. For months, I'd been grieving Eleanor and feeling sorry for myself. Now, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The thrill of a complex case with a clear path to justice. 2 weeks later, Lunara called with an urgent meeting request. "Judge, your son just made the kind of mistake that ends careers and starts prison sentences." We met at the same diner, but this time she brought a laptop and a stack of printouts that looked like evidence files from my old courtroom days. "Let's start with what happened at the casino last night," she said, opening the laptop to show me surveillance footage. "Your son played poker for 6 hours straight, lost $47,000, and then had what witnesses described as a meltdown at the cashier window." The video showed Brandon screaming at casino staff, demanding credit extensions, threatening to sue the establishment for discrimination against legal professionals. Security eventually escorted him to the parking garage where the same debt collectors I'd seen in previous photos were waiting. What did they tell him? According to my source inside casino security, they gave him 2 weeks. Pay the full $280,000 plus accumulated interest, which brings it to $312,000, or face consequences that go beyond legal collection methods. $312,000, more than Brandon made in 2 years of real estate law. "But here's where it gets interesting," Lunara continued. 6 hours after leaving the casino, your son made an emergency visit to his office. Building security recorded him arriving at 2:30 in the morning. She showed me more footage. Brandon entering his law firm's building in downtown Philadelphia, looking disheveled and desperate. He transferred $68,000 from client escrow accounts between 2:30 and 4:15 a.m. $68,000, Judge. That's not gradual embezzlement anymore. That's panic theft. I stared at the bank records. The Patterson family's deposit, gone. The Morrison couple's down payment, gone. 3 other families' earnest money, all transferred to Brandon's personal accounts in the middle of the night. How long before his clients notice? The Patterson closing is scheduled for next Friday. When the title company requests their deposit for the final settlement, there won't be any money to transfer. 9 days. In 9 days, Brandon's embezzlement would be exposed. His law license would be suspended, and criminal charges would follow. "But that's not the worst part," Lunara said. "This morning, your son took out a second mortgage on your house." I felt the blood drain from my face. "He can't do that. The power of attorney doesn't give him authority to encumber real estate." "Actually, it does. You signed a general power of attorney, not a limited one. General POA gives him the same authority you'd have, including the right to borrow against assets." She showed me the loan documents. $200,000, borrowed against the house Eleanor and I had owned, free and clear for 15 years. The house where we'd raised Brandon, where I'd planned to live until I died. Where did the money go? Direct wire transfer to Consolidated Credit this morning. He paid down his gambling debt by $200,000, reducing it to $112,000. But Judge, here's the thing. Your house was never worth enough to secure a $200,000 mortgage. Someone falsified the appraisal. She showed me the property valuation. Our modest 3-bedroom colonial, which had been worth $160,000 in the last legitimate appraisal, was suddenly valued at $350,000. Who signed off on this? Mitchell Properties, owned by Brandon's college roommate, Paul Mitchell. They've been inflating appraisals for each other's clients for months, according to the Real Estate Commission's investigation files. The scope of my son's corruption was expanding by the hour. Fake doctors, embezzled client funds, falsified property appraisals, mortgage fraud. Brandon hadn't just betrayed our family, he'd built an entire criminal enterprise. "There's more," Lunara said. "Your son called you 3 times last night between midnight and 3 a.m. What did he say?" I'd been asleep but found the voicemails this morning. I played them for Lunara. First message: "Dad, don't worry about anything. I'm handling some business issues, but everything's under control." Second message: "Dad, if anyone asks about the house or any financial stuff, just refer them to me, okay? I'm your power of attorney now." Third message: "Dad, you trust me, right? I mean, I'm your son. I would never do anything to hurt you." The desperation in his voice was unmistakable. Brandon knew his criminal house of cards was collapsing. "Judge, we need to make a decision. Do we continue building evidence, or do we act now before he can do more damage?" I thought about Eleanor's warning, about the families whose life savings Brandon had stolen, about the house that held 40 years of memories, now leveraged to pay gambling debts. What would acting now involve? Alina Brooks has prepared several options. We can file for emergency revocation of the power of attorney, claiming it was obtained through fraud, which it was. We can report the embezzlement to the DA's office and the Real Estate Commission. We can freeze his access to your accounts. And if we wait? He might transfer more assets, steal from more clients, or disappear entirely. Men facing this level of criminal exposure sometimes make very desperate choices. I closed my eyes and saw Brandon at 8 years old, promising to always tell me the truth. At 16, swearing he'd never disappoint his parents. At 25, taking his oath as an attorney, pledging to uphold justice and professional integrity. Every promise broken, every value abandoned. "Ms. Chen, I want you to call Ms. Brooks and tell her we're moving forward. Full legal action, criminal referrals, everything." "Are you sure? Once we start this process, there's no going back. Your son will face felony charges." I thought about the Patterson family, saving for years to buy their first home, about the Morrison couple, trusting their future to a lawyer who was stealing their down payment to pay loan sharks. "My son made his choices," I said. "Now he'll live with the consequences." As I drove home, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer the grieving widower, being manipulated by his ambitious son. I was Judge Riven Holloway again, and court was about to be in session. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done since Eleanor's funeral. I put on my best suit, the charcoal wool one she'd bought me for our 40th anniversary. If I was going to reclaim my life, I needed to look like the man who'd spent 35 years commanding courtrooms. My first stop was Dr. Magnus Sterling's office in Bryn Mawr. Alina Brooks had arranged the appointment, explaining that we needed independent medical verification of my cognitive status to challenge the fake diagnosis. Dr. Sterling was everything Dr. Williams had pretended to be. Board-certified neurologist, University of Pennsylvania Medical School, 30 years of experience. His office walls were covered with legitimate diplomas and awards. "Judge Holloway, Ms. Brooks explained your situation. Your son obtained a power of attorney based on a fraudulent medical assessment?" "That's correct. The doctor who diagnosed me with dementia doesn't exist." Dr. Sterling's expression hardened. "That's not just fraud, Judge. That's practicing medicine without a license, which is a felony in Pennsylvania." He conducted a thorough examination, real medical tests, not the theater performance Brandon had staged. Mini mental state examination, clock drawing, memory assessments, cognitive function evaluations. After 2 hours, Dr. Sterling reviewed his notes. "Judge Holloway, your MMSE score is 28 out of 30. That's within the normal range for someone your age. Your memory recall is excellent, your reasoning ability is sharp, and your decision-making capacity is completely intact." He typed his findings into his computer. "I'm going to be very direct in my report. Any suggestion that you have dementia or cognitive impairment is medically baseless. In fact, your cognitive function is better than most people 20 years younger." "What about the power of attorney?" "In my medical opinion, you were fully competent when you signed it, which means if you were deceived about the circumstances, the document was obtained through fraud." I left Dr. Sterling's office with a comprehensive medical report that would destroy Brandon's legal foundation. But Alina Brooks had warned me. Medical vindication was only the first step. That afternoon, I received a call from Brandon. His voice carried a new edge of panic. "Dad, we need to talk. Some people have been asking questions about our family finances." "What kind of people?" "Official people. Real Estate Commission investigators. They want to review some of my client files." I kept my voice steady. "Is there a problem with your practice?" No, just routine compliance stuff. But Dad, it's important that you don't talk to anyone without me present, okay? You're not thinking as clearly as you used to, and I don't want you to accidentally say something confusing." There it was again. The gaslighting, the attempt to make me doubt my own mental capacity. Of course, son, I wouldn't want to cause problems. Good. And Dad, if anyone asks about the house mortgage, that's just a financial restructuring. Very technical. Nothing for you to worry about. After I hung up, I called Alina Brooks. He knows the real estate commission is investigating, I told her. Expected. The Patterson family closing is tomorrow, and when their earnest money turns up missing, Brandon's embezzlement will be officially exposed. He's trying to control the narrative by discrediting you as a witness. What's our next move? Tomorrow morning, we file a motion to revoke the power of attorney supported by Dr. Sterling's report. Simultaneously, we request a restraining order preventing Brandon from accessing any more of your assets, and we meet with the district attorney's office to discuss criminal charges. All at once? Judge, you understand legal strategy. We hit him with overwhelming force before he can mount a defense or flee the jurisdiction. That evening, I sat in Eleanor's study reading through the motion Alina had prepared. 23 pages of legal citations, evidence summaries, and requests for relief. The document told the complete story. Fake medical diagnosis, fraudulent power of attorney, embezzled client funds, mortgage fraud. At 9:30, Brandon called again. Dad, I know this is hard for you, but I need you to sign some more papers tomorrow. Consolidation of assets, protection against estate taxes. Very important for your financial security. What kind of papers? Just standard stuff. Trust me, I'm a lawyer. Those words, trust me, I'm a lawyer, crystallized everything wrong with our relationship. Brandon had been trading on his professional credentials and my parental love to commit crimes against our family and his clients. I'll see you tomorrow, son. Great. And Dad, wear something nice. We might be meeting with some bank officials. After I hung up, I walked to Eleanor's picture on the mantel. Tomorrow, your son learns what happens when you lie to a judge, I said to her photograph. You tried to warn me, but I had to see it for myself. I went to bed early, but couldn't sleep. Instead, I lay awake thinking about justice. Real justice. Not the comfortable lies families tell themselves when someone they love does terrible things. At 6 a.m., my phone rang. Lunara Chen calling with urgent news. Judge, your son just left his apartment with 2 suitcases and a briefcase. He's driving toward Philadelphia International Airport. My blood went cold. Is he running? I don't know, but my source at the Real Estate Commission says they're issuing a formal complaint this morning. If Brandon gets on a plane before we file our legal motions, he escapes justice, I finished. Alina's already at the courthouse. We're filing everything in 30 minutes, but Judge, you need to get down there now. If we're going to stop your son from fleeing, we need that restraining order signed today. I hung up and reached for my car keys. 35 years on the bench had taught me that justice delayed often becomes justice denied. But Brandon had made one crucial mistake in his calculations. He'd forgotten that his father knew every judge, every clerk, and every procedure in the Philadelphia County Courthouse. The call came at 7:45 a.m., 48 hours after we'd filed our emergency motions. Alina Brooks's voice was tight with concern. Judge, we have a serious problem. Brandon didn't flee the country yesterday. He was meeting with a different kind of lawyer. I was pouring coffee, still wearing the same suit from our courthouse victory 2 days earlier. The emergency hearing had gone perfectly. Judge Patricia Hayes, my former colleague, had immediately revoked the fraudulent power of attorney and frozen Brandon's access to my accounts. What kind of lawyer? Elder abuse specialist. Brandon filed a counter motion claiming we coerced you into challenging his authority. He's alleging that I manipulated a confused elderly man into making false accusations against his loving son. The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the kitchen floor. He's claiming I'm incompetent? Worse, he's filed for emergency guardianship. Full guardianship, Judge. If he wins, he'll have complete control over your person and property. You wouldn't be able to make any legal or financial decisions without his approval. I sat down heavily in Eleanor's chair. Guardianship was the nuclear option in elder law. It stripped away every right an adult possessed, reducing them to the legal status of a child. What's his evidence? Dr. Williams' fake medical report, plus testimony from 3 witnesses claiming you've exhibited confusion and memory problems over the past 6 months. What witnesses? Paul Mitchell, the appraiser who helped him commit mortgage fraud, Jenny Castellanos, sister of the fake doctor, and Margaret Holloway, my sister-in-law, Eleanor's younger sister who'd always resented our financial stability, Margaret, who'd borrowed money from us repeatedly over the years and never repaid a cent. Margaret agreed to testify against me? Brandon's paying her legal fees in exchange for her testimony. She's prepared to swear that Eleanor confided concerns about your mental state before she died. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Brandon had done to this point. Margaret was willing to perjure herself and dishonor Eleanor's memory for money. When's the hearing? Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Emergency session, same courthouse where we won 2 days ago. But Judge, here's the thing. Brandon requested Judge Patricia Hayes recuse herself due to your professional relationship. Who's the assigned judge? Judge Robert Morrison? Do you know him? I knew him. Morrison was 62, ambitious, and had always resented my reputation in family court. He'd been passed over for chief judge twice, losing to candidates I'd recommended. He's not friendly territory, I admitted. Gets worse. Morrison granted Brandon's request for an expedited timeline. We have 18 hours to prepare a defense against guardianship proceedings that usually take weeks to develop. 18 hours. In normal circumstances, fighting a guardianship motion required extensive medical evaluations, witness depositions, expert testimony. Brandon's legal team was betting that time pressure would prevent us from mounting an adequate defense. Alina, there's something else. Brandon has been systematically poisoning people's perceptions of my mental state for months. If Morrison is predisposed to believe I'm incompetent, you could lose everything. Your house, your assets, your legal autonomy. Brandon would become your guardian, with authority to make all decisions about your life. I walked to the window and looked at Eleanor's garden. She'd planted roses along the fence, telling me they'd bloom long after we were gone. Now those roses might belong to the son who'd betrayed everything we'd built. What do we need to win? Overwhelming medical evidence of your competency, multiple expert witnesses, character testimony from people who've interacted with you recently, and we need to discredit Brandon's witnesses without giving Morrison any reason to think you're vindictive or paranoid. The medical evidence we have. Dr. Sterling's report is strong, but Brandon's team will argue that one test can't override months of observed decline. We need more doctors. I thought about my options. 18 hours to assemble a defense that could take weeks under normal circumstances. Brandon had chosen his timing well. Most of my former colleagues were retired, and the legal community I'd spent decades building relationships with had largely moved on. Alina, what happens if we lose tomorrow? Brandon becomes your guardian. He regains control of all your assets, plus legal authority over your medical care, housing decisions, even your right to hire an attorney. You'd need his permission to challenge the guardianship. And the criminal charges against him? Become much harder to pursue. Guardianship gives him the right to speak on your behalf. He could withdraw your cooperation with the prosecutor's office, claim you were confused when you made the accusations. I understood now why Brandon had seemed so confident during our brief phone conversation yesterday. He wasn't just fighting to avoid criminal prosecution. He was maneuvering to gain complete control over my life. The phone rang. Brandon's voice, smoother than it had been in weeks. Dad, I heard about your lawyers filing all those motions. I'm disappointed. I thought we could work things out as a family. What do you want, Brandon? I want what's best for you. These people you've been talking to, they're filling your head with paranoid ideas. Ms. Brooks, that private investigator, they're taking advantage of your condition. What condition? Dad, please. We both know you haven't been yourself since Mom died. The memory problems, the confusion, the paranoid accusations. Dr. Williams documented everything. I gripped the phone harder. Williams doesn't exist, Brandon. Silence on the other end. Then a long sigh. Dad, see, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You met Dr. Williams. You shook his hand. He examined you in our kitchen, but now you're claiming he doesn't exist. The gaslighting was sophisticated, designed to make me question my own perceptions. If I'd been a different man, less secure in my mental faculties, Brandon's manipulation might have worked. I'll see you in court tomorrow, son. Dad, wait. Before you hang up, I want you to know that everything I've done has been to protect you. The power of attorney, the financial management, even tomorrow's hearing. It's all because I love you. Love. The word came out harsher than I'd intended. Brandon, love doesn't steal. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't hire fake doctors to manipulate grieving parents. Another silence. Then, we'll let Judge Morrison decide who's thinking clearly. And after I hung up, I realized the true scope of what I was facing. This wasn't just about money or power of attorney anymore. Tomorrow, a judge would decide whether I was competent to live my own life. At 5 a.m. the morning of the guardianship hearing, I was already dressed and reviewing legal documents when Alina Brooks called with unexpected news. Judge, we have help, more help than I dared hope for. What kind of help? Judge Patricia Hayes spent yesterday making phone calls on your behalf. 3 retired judges from your old chambers are coming to testify as character witnesses. Dr. Sterling recruited 2 additional neurologists for independent evaluations, and Lunara found something that changes everything. I felt a spark of the old confidence. In 35 years on the bench, I'd learned that cases were won with preparation and evidence, not hope and prayers. What did Lunara find? Jimmy Castellanos, the fake doctor, kept more than just text messages. He recorded his entire conversation with Brandon about impersonating a physician. Everything, Judge. The planning, the payment, Brandon's instructions about how to lie to you. Evidence. Real, admissible evidence that would expose Brandon's fraud in open court. Where do we stand with the medical evaluations? Dr. Sterling, Dr. Rebecca Martinez from Jefferson Hospital, and Dr. Susan Chen from Penn Presbyterian all examined you yesterday afternoon. All 3 reached the same conclusion. You're cognitively intact, psychologically stable, and fully capable of managing your own affairs. 3 independent medical opinions. Morrison couldn't dismiss that as convenient professional courtesy. Character witnesses? Judge Hayes, Judge William Carter, and Judge Thomas Richardson, all retired from your former court, all prepared to testify that you've remained sharp, engaged, and legally astute since retirement. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Patricia, Bill, and Tom, 3 of the most respected family court judges in Pennsylvania history. Their testimony would carry significant weight with Morrison. In our strategy for discrediting Brandon's witnesses, Jimmy Castellanos will testify that Brandon paid him to impersonate a doctor, including specific instructions to diagnose you with dementia regardless of your actual condition. Paul Mitchell is under investigation by the Real Estate Commission for appraisal fraud. Margaret Holloway, Alina paused. Margaret might be more complicated. Why? She's genuinely convinced that Eleanor was worried about your mental state. Brandon has been feeding her selected information for months, building a narrative that you've been declining. Manipulation by proxy. Exactly. Margaret isn't lying from her perspective. She believes what Brandon told her. At 8:15, I arrived at the courthouse where I'd spent most of my professional life. The building felt different as a defendant instead of a judge, but the fundamentals remained the same. Facts, law, and evidence would determine the outcome. Brandon was already there with his attorney, Kenneth Walsh, a guardianship specialist known for aggressive tactics. They'd positioned themselves at the petitioner's table, surrounded by thick folders and confident expressions. Dad, Brandon said as I passed their table, last chance to resolve this privately. We can still work something out. I looked at my son, really looked at him, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, helped with homework, celebrated at law school graduation. Somewhere along the way, that boy had become a stranger, willing to destroy his own father to escape the consequences of his crimes. I'll see you in court, Brandon. Judge Morrison entered at precisely 9 a.m. He was younger than I remembered, wearing the black robes with the careful dignity of someone still proving himself worthy of the position. This is an emergency hearing on the petition of Brandon Holloway for guardianship of Riven Holloway, alleged to be incapacitated. Mr. Walsh, proceed with your opening statement. Walsh stood and addressed the court with practiced sincerity. Your Honor, this is a heartbreaking case of a son trying to protect his father from the consequences of advancing dementia. Mr. Riven Holloway, once a distinguished judge in this very courthouse, is no longer capable of managing his affairs or making rational decisions. He painted a picture of a confused elderly man, manipulated by unscrupulous attorneys and investigators, lashing out with paranoid accusations against the son who only wanted to help. The evidence will show that Mr. Holloway suffers from progressive cognitive decline, documented by medical professionals, observed by family members, and tragically evident in his recent behavior patterns. When Walsh finished, Alina stood for our opening. Your Honor, this is not a case about aging or dementia. This is a case about financial fraud, elder abuse, and a son's desperate attempt to avoid criminal prosecution by discrediting his victim. She looked directly at Morrison. The evidence will show that every element of Mr. Brandon Holloway's petition is based on fabricated medical reports and perjured testimony. Court was in session, and the battle for my freedom was about to begin. The first witness was supposed to be Dr. Williams. Brandon's attorney, Walsh, had planned to lead with medical testimony supporting the guardianship petition. Your Honor, Walsh announced, we called Dr. Jonathan Williams to testify about his examination of the respondent. Dr. Williams is not available, Alina responded, standing immediately, because Dr. Williams doesn't exist. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Counselor, please clarify. Your Honor, we called Jimmy Castellanos. Whoa. A young man in his 20s entered the courtroom, clearly nervous but determined. He was sworn in and took the witness stand. Mr. Castellanos, Alina began, do you know the petitioner, Brandon Holloway? Yes, ma'am. He hired me to pretend to be a doctor. The courtroom fell silent. I watched Brandon's face drain of color. Please tell the court about that arrangement. Mr. Holloway paid me $8,500 to impersonate a physician named Dr. Jonathan Williams. He gave me fake business cards, medical forms, and told me exactly what to say to his father. Alina handed him a device. Is this your phone containing a recording of your conversation with Mr. Brandon Holloway? Yes, ma'am. Play the recording for the court. Brandon's voice filled the courtroom, clear and damning. I need you to diagnose my father with early-stage dementia. Tell him he shouldn't be making financial decisions. I'll have power of attorney papers ready for him to sign. What if he asks medical questions? He's grieving and confused. He'll believe whatever you tell him. Just sound official. Judge Morrison's expression hardened as the recording continued. When it finished, he looked directly at Brandon. Mr. Holloway, did you hire this witness to impersonate a physician? Brandon whispered urgently to Walsh, who stood. Your Honor, my client. I asked Mr. Holloway directly. Brandon stood slowly. Your Honor, there were circumstances. Did you or did you not pay this witness to provide false medical testimony about your father? The courtroom waited. Brandon looked around desperately, perhaps hoping for an escape that didn't exist. Your Honor, my father needed protection. His judgment wasn't... Answer the question, Mr. Holloway. Yes or no? Yes, Your Honor, but... Sit down. Morrison turned to Walsh. Counselor, are you prepared to proceed with witnesses who actually exist? Walsh's composure had cracked. Your Honor, we call Margaret Holloway. My sister-in-law took the stand, looking smaller and more uncertain than when she'd entered the courtroom. Alina had been right. Margaret genuinely believed the story Brandon had fed her. Mrs. Holloway, Walsh began, did your sister Eleanor express concerns about her husband's mental state before she died? Yes, Margaret said quietly. She told me Riven was forgetting things, repeating stories, making poor decisions. What specific examples did she give? She said he'd forgotten their anniversary, that he was spending money on unnecessary things, that he seemed confused about dates and appointments. I felt a stab of pain. These weren't Eleanor's words. They were Brandon's, filtered through Margaret's trusting nature. When Alina cross-examined, her approach was gentle but precise. Mrs. Holloway, when did these conversations with Eleanor take place? Over several months before she died. And how often did you visit Eleanor and Riven during her illness? Margaret hesitated. Not as often as I should have, maybe once a month. So these concerns Eleanor allegedly expressed, were they based on her daily observations or on information someone else provided? Eleanor mentioned that Brandon was worried about his father. So Eleanor's concerns were actually Brandon's concerns, passed along through Eleanor to you? I suppose, yes. Mrs. Holloway, do you have any personal direct observation of Riven Holloway exhibiting memory problems or confusion? Margaret looked uncomfortable. Well, no. When I visited, he seemed fine, but Eleanor said what Brandon told her to say, didn't she? Walsh objected, but the damage was done. Margaret's testimony had revealed itself as second-hand manipulation. Next, Alina called Dr. Sterling, who testified about my cognitive evaluations with clinical precision. 28 out of 30 on the MMSE. Perfect recall on recent and remote memory tests. Normal executive function assessments. Dr. Sterling, in your medical opinion, does Riven Holloway show any signs of dementia or cognitive impairment? None whatsoever. His cognitive function is excellent for someone his age. Could someone with Mr. Holloway's level of cognitive function be manipulated into making false accusations against a family member? Absolutely not. Someone with his mental acuity would be fully capable of recognizing manipulation and responding appropriately. Then Dr. Martinez and Dr. Chen provided similar testimony. 3 independent physicians, all reaching identical conclusions about my mental capacity. Judge Morrison looked increasingly frustrated with Brandon's legal team. When Walsh attempted to call Paul Mitchell, the fraudulent appraiser, Morrison cut him off. Counselor, this court has heard sufficient evidence. Mr. Walsh, your petition for guardianship is based entirely on fabricated medical testimony and second-hand hearsay. More importantly, your client has admitted under oath to hiring someone to impersonate a physician for the purpose of defrauding his father. Morrison turned to Brandon. Mr. Holloway, stand up. Brandon rose unsteadily. You are an officer of this court, licensed to practice law in Pennsylvania. You have admitted to conspiracy to commit fraud, practicing medicine without a license, and elder abuse. This court is referring your conduct to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution and to the Pennsylvania Bar Association for disciplinary action. Morrison's voice carried the authority of 30 years on the bench. Furthermore, this court finds no evidence whatsoever that Riven Holloway is incapacitated or in need of guardianship. The petition is denied with prejudice. He looked at me directly. Judge Holloway, I apologize that you've been subjected to this abuse of the legal system. As the gavel fell, I watched my son's legal career end with a single judicial decision. After court adjourned, I stood in the courthouse hallway, watching Brandon speak urgently with his attorney. Their conversation was animated, desperate, with the body language of people whose carefully constructed plans had just collapsed. Alina approached me with an envelope bearing the seal of Eleanor's estate attorney. Judge, there's one more thing. Eleanor's attorney asked me to give you this after the guardianship hearing, regardless of the outcome. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a letter in Eleanor's careful handwriting, dated 3 days before her death. My dearest Riven, it began, if you're reading this, then our fears about Brandon have come true. I'm so sorry, my love. I saw the signs, but hoped I was wrong. I continued reading, my eyes filling with tears. I've known about his gambling for months. The late-night phone calls, the stress, the way he looked at our financial documents during family dinners. I hired Lunara Chen to investigate, not to harm our son, but to protect you after I'm gone. Eleanor had known. All those months I'd thought she was simply worried about normal family tensions. She'd been conducting her own investigation. The trust documents contain a special provision I had our attorney add without your knowledge. It's called a character clause, based on the Morrison estate precedent you worked on in 1987. Do you remember that case? I did remember. Morrison versus Morrison, a complex estate dispute, where a father had included provisions requiring his heirs to demonstrate moral fitness before receiving their inheritance. Eleanor's letter continued. If Brandon ever attempts to abuse your trust or steal from our family, the character clause activates. All inheritance provisions for him are revoked, and his portion of the estate transfers to the charity fund we discussed. Alina was reading over my shoulder. Judge, this changes everything legally. Eleanor's trust wasn't just about money. It was a test of character that Brandon has spectacularly failed. I looked down the hallway where Brandon was still talking urgently with Walsh. My son had no idea that his mother had anticipated his betrayal and legally protected against it. What does this mean practically? It means Brandon inherits nothing. Eleanor's life insurance, her share of the house, her investment accounts, all of it now funds the charitable foundation she established. The letter's final paragraph brought both heartbreak and vindication. Riven, I know this betrayal will hurt you terribly, but remember that the son we raise still exists somewhere inside the man who's forgotten his values. Don't let bitterness consume you, but don't enable his destructive choices either. Love him, but protect yourself and others from the consequences of his actions. Our legacy isn't money. It's the values we lived by and the people we helped along the way. Alina pointed to a formal document attached to the letter. This is Eleanor's final amendment to the trust, filed with the probate court the day before she died. It's completely legal and irrevocable. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my jacket pocket. Eleanor had protected me one final time, using the law we'd both served to ensure that love wouldn't be manipulated into enabling criminal behavior. Brandon appeared at my shoulder, his face desperate and angry. Dad, we need to talk. This isn't over. I can appeal the guardianship decision, and there are other legal options. I looked at my son, seeing clearly for the first time in months. The boy I'd raised was indeed somewhere inside the man standing before me. But that boy was buried under layers of greed, entitlement, and self-deception. Brandon, your mother left you a letter too. I handed him Eleanor's second envelope, the one containing her final words to him. She loved you enough to hope you'd prove her wrong about your character, I said, but she loved me enough to protect against the possibility that you'd prove her right. As Brandon tore open his mother's final letter, I walked away toward the courthouse exit, leaving him to face the consequences of choices that could no longer be undone. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of the newly established Holloway Foundation, looking at architectural plans for our first project, a legal aid clinic specializing in elder abuse prevention. The foundation had grown beyond anything Eleanor and I had imagined. Her trust fund, combined with donations from former colleagues and community members who'd heard our story, had reached $500,000 in startup funding. Judge, the Patterson family wanted to thank you personally, Alina said, introducing a young couple with their 2 small children. Brandon's restitution payments helped them finally close on their house. The criminal prosecution had been swift and thorough. Brandon pleaded guilty to fraud, embezzlement, and practicing law while engaging in criminal conduct. His sentence included 2 years in minimum security prison, 5 years probation, and full restitution to his victims. His law license was permanently revoked. The Patterson family's ordeal had a happier ending than most. The Real Estate Commission's Victim Fund, supplemented by Brandon's asset forfeiture, had made them whole financially. Other families hadn't been as fortunate. Judge Holloway, Mr. Patterson said, shaking my hand, we know this was painful for you personally. Thank you for doing the right thing despite the family cost. After they left, I sat alone in Eleanor's chair, reading the Foundation's mission statement we'd finalized that morning. The Eleanor Holloway Foundation exists to protect vulnerable adults from financial abuse and to support families navigating the complex intersection of love, law, and accountability. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Dad, I finish my program next month. Would you be willing to meet? I understand if the answer is no. I have things to say that I should have said months ago, Brandon. I stared at the message for a long time. Brandon had been participating in a prison rehabilitation program focused on gambling addiction and financial crimes. His counselor had contacted me earlier, explaining that my son was genuinely working to understand the impact of his choices. But understanding consequences wasn't the same as earning forgiveness. And forgiveness wasn't the same as restored trust. I typed back, complete your program successfully. Make full restitution to your victims. Then we can discuss a conversation. Love doesn't mean overlooking harm, but it doesn't mean permanent rejection either. Looking at Eleanor's picture on my desk, I felt something I hadn't experienced since her death: peace with difficult decisions. Our story wasn't about a perfect family or simple resolution. It was about the sometimes terrible necessity of choosing justice over comfort, truth over convenience, and accountability over enabling. If this resonates with your own family experiences, please share it. And if you know someone who needs protection from financial abuse, don't wait for the perfect moment. Sometimes love means saying no, even to the people we cherish most. Justice isn't always gentle, but it's always necessary.